Hey, yeah, I'd like to order a large pizza with ham, mushrooms, pineapple, and green olives. Let's also get an order of jalapeno poppers and hold on one second. Let me see if the trolls want anything. You guys hungry? What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilor, and today we're going to feed the trolls. Specifically, I want to talk about the subjective nature of video games as an art form and how differences of opinion are normal and are things that should be accepted and encouraged inside of video games. And at what points those differences of opinions turn into arguments online that can end up crossing the line. And basically what this is sort of coming from and what sort of got me on this whole kick today is if you saw my last week's video where I was talking about a survey that Blizzard had put out for Classic Plus, I gave a bunch of my opinions on what changes to Classic Plus and what sort of changes to something like SOD, what I would like to see in a game. What sort of video game would I like to play? What version of WoW would resonate for me? And I talked a bunch about all of that. And I also spent a whole lot of time in that video talking about how I felt like the original, no changes version of the game needs to also exist and be supported. Unfortunately, a lot of people seem to have missed that part. A lot of people seem to have just completely ignored the fact that I spent probably a quarter of that video talking about how I still think that Classic Era needs to exist and be largely unchanged, and how that game that they want to play should also exist for them. I still agree with that. I think that should be the case. Instead, a lot of people just decided to come at me and start arguing because, of course, they did, because it's the internet. Why wouldn't they? And I'm used to that. I've been doing this for a long time. Under normal circumstances, I would probably completely ignore this and just move on and make a different video. I'm not quite sure what has cheesed me off so much about this one, but it also, I think, serves as an interesting sort of discussion point to really examine the nature of subjective opinions inside of an art form like video games and what can cause those differences, and also talk a little bit about where I feel like a lot of people end up crossing the line and going over into now making personal attacks and assumptions about another person based on the fact that they just like something differently. So instead of just ignoring the trolls, I'm going to do what any self-respecting content creator would do in this situation, which is fan the flames for views. Now, I want to be absolutely clear yet again. I'm questioning whether or not the people that would argue with me are going to pay attention to this part anyway. So listen up, please. I encourage differences of opinions. I encourage disagreements. If you don't like what I have to say, if you don't agree with my perspective on things, that's great. I want to hear that. I want to hear about where my thoughts are different from other people's thoughts. And sometimes that actually changes my mind. Sometimes that causes me to think about things in a way and from a perspective that I hadn't considered before, which then makes me go, okay, actually, hold on, they have a point. One of the things that was brought up in the comments on that recent video, a couple people were talking about how SOD has ended up being like this end game rush sort of experience, which feels a lot more retail like, whereas the original classic game was much more about that journey to level 60 and encouraging and growing your character over time and building up towards that eventual end game. And then, yes, there was a bunch of stuff to do at end game, but the 1 through 60 experience was a much larger part of the original classic game. And I agree with that. That's a very, very good point, and I'm glad that people brought it up. So thank you so much for the commenters who pointed that out. That's a very, very good point. And I would want something that is intended to be a Classic Plus to be less focused on a rush to endgame, to be less focused on get your leveling in as fast as possible. Do more things with the leveling experience from 1 through 60. I would love to see that experience in a video game or in a version of Classic Plus. That's all great. I love when people present to me new viewpoints, new opinions, and even just disagree with me in a way that is sensible enough that I can look at that and say, okay, yeah, I understand where we disagree here. Or maybe you have changed my mind about it. That's fine. There's no problem with trying to convince someone that your opinion is something that they should consider as well. Where it crosses the line for me is when you get to the point where you start to make assumptions about the person and what their experience is and actually attack their perspective, attack their experience in an attempt to invalidate their opinion and make them be wrong in a case where you're ultimately talking about something that is subjective. And okay, so subjective, objective, what does all this mean? I think it's worth probably breaking this down a little bit because there is some people that will have confusion about this. So we're gonna get into the differences. What does subjective and objective actually even mean in this situation? Video games are an art form, right? I think we're in this modern day and age. We mostly agree at this point that video games are art. They are a form of entertainment. Entertainment is typically a form of art. and so on. So video games are art. Art is subjective. Art is inherently subjective. And the reason that is, let's talk about the definitions of subjective versus objective. It all comes down to what is the source of truth? What is the source of right or wrong, yes or no, good or bad in this situation? When you're talking about, let me back up just slightly. The terms subjective and objective come from the two things that are involved in this situation. There is an object. This is the thing being like considered. This is the thing that exists. There is an object of some kind. It doesn't have to be a physical object. It can be a concept or whatever, but the object is the thing being considered, essentially. And then the subject is the person or whatever that is considering, that is doing the considering, is doing the perceiving in this situation. When something is objective, that means the source of good or bad, true or false, whatever, lies directly on that object itself. There is a thing that is true for everyone, regardless of who the subject is in this situation. There's a thing that is true or false about this for everyone involved. So a real obvious, somewhat extreme, but I'm using an extreme example to make it as obvious as possible. Case of an objective fact would be human rights are good, racism is bad. That's the sort of thing that, like, yeah, okay, I think pretty much everyone can agree on that. And it's not even something that's really up for debate, in my opinion. Racism is a bad thing. Human rights are a good thing. If you disagree with that, you are wrong. That is, I'm confident enough to call that an objective fact. But that's a situation where we're talking about something that directly affects a broad amount of people, and it affects these people in a way that is, it pertains to their livelihood. It really affects people on like a day-to-day constant basis. Art isn't that really. Art is something that exists purely to please the person who is experiencing it. It's there to please the viewer or the player or the listener or whatever. It's there. Its sole existence is to please the audience. That's the whole reason that art even exists, is that you perceive it, you experience it in whatever capacity, and your life is, you feel better about yourself as a result, or you feel something that you then look back and say, yes, I enjoyed that experience. That is the purpose of art. It has no other purpose beyond that. It's purely there to enrich the daily life of the people that are experiencing it. And because its sole purpose is to please the audience, right? And because everybody has different tastes, everyone likes and dislikes different things. That is an objective fact about the human race, is that everyone has different likes and dislikes about different things. And that's just how humans exist. That is an objective fact. The fact that the art only exists to please that audience means that it then inherently becomes subjective, where the source of truth on whether this is right or wrong, good or bad, etc., whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, whether this is something they enjoy or they do not enjoy, that comes down to the opinion of the subject. That's why that we call these subjective opinions, because the person who is doing the perceiving in this case is ultimately the person who is making the determination on whether they like it or not. So a couple of examples there. Like for me personally, I'm not a huge fan of country music, especially like modern, like what's called stadium country music, I think is the term for it. The songs where it's like this big produced thing, and they do a lot of these huge concerts, and every song is about your dog and your truck and your boots and your wife or whatever. Like that sort of country music doesn't really appeal to me. It's not something that I enjoy. I won't like hate it if someone is listening to it in the other room, but it's not something that I would seek out and go and listen to myself, because there are other genres of music that I enjoy more. That said, there are a lot of people that really like that kind of music. Maybe they find it comforting. Maybe they have some sort of cultural alignment for it. Like they feel like it reminds them of home or whatever. There's a lot of people that genuinely enjoy that music. And when they listen to it, they enjoy the experience, and maybe they feel better, or they, whatever feelings they incur from it, they like having those feelings. Because sometimes, you listen to a song, it makes you sad, but you like that the song makes you sad, which is a complicated thing to try and explain. But that's why I'm boiling down to, they have the experience and they enjoy the experience of listening to this song. And that's fine. Like, again, the whole purpose of art is to please the audience. So if you are the audience for this type of music, and listening to stadium country is something that you enjoy doing, great, job's done. That is as far as that needs to go. I don't need to sit here and pick apart your entire backstory and history to determine whether you are right or wrong to enjoy stadium country music. If you enjoy it, that's your determination to make. I have no business in that argument. Here's a slightly more controversial example that people who've been following me for a while will probably have seen coming already. I don't like ketchup, personally. I don't like ketchup at all. It is one of the worst things to me. I really, really despise ketchup. I really don't like it at all. And people always tell me like, oh, do you not like tomatoes? No, I love tomatoes. I love tomato sauces. I love things that taste like tomato. To me, ketchup tastes like high fructose corn syrup, at least like the modern, like in the US, at least mass marketed, like the Heinz and so on brands of ketchup. Those are things that to me, they just taste like high fructose corn syrup. I don't taste the tomato in them. They're just like a sugary sweet thing that I don't like. It's not a flavor that I enjoy. Part of that also from my perspective, again, because we're talking about perspectives here, right? Part of the reason that I don't enjoy ketchup is because when I was much younger, God, 25 years ago, I worked in fast food for a while. And one of the things you have to do when you work in fast food is you have to take out the trash. And the trash at the McDonald's that I worked at, which was my very first job, I worked at a McDonald's. The trash always smelled like ketchup. So in my brain, I equate the smell of ketchup to the smell of garbage. To me, those are the same smell. And so when I have something that has a bunch of ketchup on it, I smell it and I think of garbage, and it makes me not enjoy whatever it is I'm eating. That is just me and how my brain operates. And that's why I don't really like ketchup. Now, obviously, sometimes on stream, if you've been watching my stream, every once in a while, I will go way over the top on like, oh no, ketchup is awful. Everyone who eats ketchup is awful. In case it wasn't already abundantly clear, that's something that I do because I know it's ridiculous and I'm intentionally doing something ridiculous for the entertainment value of the stream. I don't care if you like ketchup. Like if you're someone who enjoys ketchup, that's fine. I'm happy for you. It's on everything. So that's good. I genuinely wish that I enjoyed ketchup because it's on everything. So in that case, that is a subjective opinion. I do not like ketchup. A lot of people do. And that's fine. I'm not going to, aside from when I'm memeing about it on stream just to be funny, I'm not going to tell you that you are wrong for liking ketchup. And just because I apparently woke up and chose violence today, let's do an even more controversial opinion that might hit a little bit closer to home for a lot of people. I didn't like Red Dead Redemption 2. I found it boring and I lost interest in it pretty quickly. A lot of people have said that it's got one of the best stories ever, and maybe it eventually grows into a best story ever. But for me, it's as soon as I reach the point where it's like, oh, we have to go bust Micah out of prison, I'm like sitting there going, okay, every single character here, including the one I'm playing, is an idiot. And I have a hard time enjoying that sort of story. I don't like when every character is stupid in a story. I watch it and I just get frustrated because I'm like, oh my God, you guys are making such dumb decisions constantly in this situation. That's not the case for everyone. There's a lot of people who will still be perfectly happy to go ahead and sit through that, and they will enjoy it. And they actually appreciate that all of the characters. And I have the same issue with Breaking Bad, where I felt like everyone was just making dumb decisions constantly. And that turned me off from the show because I just wanted one person in there to be kind of a little bit smart. That's just me and how I enjoy things and how I perceive things. I have a hard time with story-based content in which everyone is making dumb decisions all of the time. That's just me. That's why I wasn't able to get through Red Dead Redemption 2. Basically, I got to that mission and I never completed it because I was like, I don't want to do this. This feels dumb. Why am I doing this sort of situation? So there you go. There's another subjective opinion that I have. And this one specifically about a video game that a lot of people love. And I want to be clear. I wish that I didn't have that problem with stories. I wish that I was able to enjoy Red Dead Redemption 2 to the extent that so many people clearly enjoy it. I just don't. I can't like deny that about myself. I'm not going to sit through it and be like, I should be enjoying this. I'm miserable, but I should be enjoying this, and just trying to sit through it as though I am. It's just not something that I liked. Again, subjective opinion, where I, the subject in this situation, am experiencing this thing, and for me, it's not landing. And again, that's completely and totally fine. That is completely fine. Red Dead Redemption 2 did very well, and I'm very happy for Rockstar that it did very well, and I'm very happy for all of the people that enjoyed it, that they did enjoy it. There's so many people that this is like, yeah, this is the greatest game of all time. That I'm happy for them. I genuinely am, and their opinions are not wrong. I'm not going to tell anyone that they were not allowed to enjoy this game because I didn't. That's not the case. That's not the nature of a subjective opinion. But this is why I think it's so important when having a discussion and having a disagreement with someone about your opinions of a video game, that you keep in mind that their experiences are still valid. Their approach and their perspective is still valid. You might be able to give them information that changes their perspective somewhat, which will then change their opinion. You might be able to explain to them why you like it, and then they go, oh yeah, I actually kind of see that. And then they then they go and enjoy it. In fact, if you loved Red Dead Redemption 2, I would love to hear why you loved Red Dead Redemption 2, because maybe you'll change my opinion and I'll go back and play it. And now I'm like, oh, I get it now. I'm having fun with this. I'm enjoying this. I would love that, actually. I've bought the game twice. I would like to enjoy playing it, please, very much. By the way, I bought it because Red Dead Online, which I did actually enjoy Red Dead Online very much. But anyway, having a discussion about this sort of stuff is fine. And even trying to convince someone that your viewpoint could also be their viewpoint, like trying to explain your viewpoint to someone and convince them that they could also like it as well. That's all totally fine. To me, where it crosses the line is when you then try to make your opinion be the objectively correct one by stating that their opinion is invalid because of whatever differences in perception that they might have. So for example, in last week's video about the Classic Plus survey, there was someone who made a whole lot of assumptions about my experiences and what I like in video games based off of a single line from the video in which I said that I didn't like that entangling roots didn't work indoors for druids. To me, entangling roots not working indoors, I'm going to explain this in a little bit more detail here while I have the moment. To me, entangling roots not working indoors in WoW Classic feels arbitrary and weird and takes me out of the game. It feels like it breaks the immersion for me, because I can be standing on a concrete block in the middle of the desert in Tanarus and somehow roots sprout up out of that block and root things into place, and that's fine. But I can be inside Razorfen Crawl where there's thorns and roots everywhere inside that whole dungeon, and yet I cannot control any roots in there. To me, that's immersion breaking and feels weird. The indoor-outdoor restriction for entangling roots on Druid in Classic is something that I have always felt arbitrary, and it doesn't feel like flavor to me. It feels like the opposite of that. It feels like it's breaking the immersion for me. That is my perspective on why that feels immersion breaking to me. That doesn't mean that anyone else's perspective is wrong. I'm just explaining my perspective in this situation. And someone really took issue with that and went to the extent of like saying that I don't like to role play. Spoilers, I role play almost every day. If you watch my streams, I spend a lot of time role playing constantly. In fact, we're going to be doing a ton of role play on stream this whole week in games like Grand Theft Auto and Atlas. There's a Dark Side RP launch as well coming out this week. So we're going to be doing a lot of role play this week. I've been playing D&D since whenever 3.5 came out. I think that was like 25 years ago at this point. I've been playing D&D for a long time. I'm a heavy role player, and I'm big on immersion, and I'm big on like investing myself in the game. This person was attempting to invalidate my opinion and make me wrong by assuming that they knew what my perspective was, and thus also assuming that that perspective was wrong. And that was something that I didn't really appreciate. So that's why I'm feeding the trolls today, because that kind of irked me a little bit. That's where I feel like things start to cross the line. If you feel like your opinion is only valid if someone else's opinion is invalid, that is the point where you've basically lost the understanding of what an opinion is in the first place. Because again, the very nature of a subjective opinion, the very nature of an opinion about any art form, video games included, is that your perspective as a player is what matters. Your individual perspective, if you're not enjoying something, or you think something should be changed, or you feel like you would enjoy something more if this change occurred, that's your opinion, and that is thus the truth, right? That is the correct thing. That is the, as far as that truth goes. Someone else can have a different opinion of it entirely, and that is true for them. That is just how the nature of subjective opinions work. So when you're having these discussions online, I guess this is somewhat of a plea to the gaming community at large. Please feel free to have differences of opinion. Please, I encourage differences of opinion. Those sorts of discussions need to happen for people to understand more, and for video game developers as well, to understand more where people's opinions are coming from, so that they can make the games that these people want to play. Like if you're never talking with anyone in any certain circumstance whatsoever about what you like in a video game, what you dislike in a video game, then it's very hard to ever make a video game that you will like or dislike. You're just kind of hoping that someone at some point will accidentally do that thing for you. Someone will at some point, or that someone else will have the same opinion and argue it as well, or whatever. But like these discussions are healthy, is basically where I'm trying to get to with this. These are things that are good for people to discuss. This sort of conversation. This is why I became a community manager originally, is because these sort of conversations are healthy to encourage, and they are ultimately good for the gaming community. The problem is just when you extend beyond the concept of subjective opinion, and you extend beyond the concept of whether or not you think something is fun and someone else doesn't, into I am right, my opinion is the correct fact, your opinion is an incorrect non-fact, therefore your opinion is invalid. That's just not how opinions work. But maybe you disagree. Maybe all of these thoughts are different. In which case, feel free to leave a comment below and let's continue having a discussion about it. Like I am very open to these sorts of discussions. A big part of how I arrive at my own opinions is by weighing everyone's perspectives as much as I possibly can. So I really do appreciate all the discussions. But let's move on to some questions for today. The first one comes from Revan992 on YouTube, who says, have you read the WoW Chronicles books and are you excited for Volume 4? So this question came in prior to the release of Volume 4. So it's Volume 4 is now out. And I've seen some opinions about it. I haven't read it yet myself. I've seen some opinions about it that make me think that this one might be worth skipping. There's a lot of discussion about it. And part of why I say that is because these books to me are less of they're not something that I feel like I need to own. I'm glad that they exist, right? I enjoy that the WoW Chronicles books exist because to me, these books aren't something that I'm going to sit down with and just go page by page and read through the whole thing like it's a storybook. I'm not going to do that. To me, these things are like encyclopedias. They're like reference material. These are things that are establishing a canon inside the Warcraft universe. And I think that's good. I think that's a good thing to have exist. I don't need a copy of it myself to know that the information that is presented inside of that book has now been written down and cataloged, and this is now canon for the Warcraft universe. I'm certainly curious about some things. And if I'm ever like in a point where I really want to sit down and understand, like, okay, let's learn as much about Xalatath as I possibly can, and if I then learn that there's stuff about that inside of one of the WoW Chronicles books, then yeah, sure. At that point, I will go ahead and read it. I'll purchase it and I will look at it and I'll be like, okay, this is part of my research for this thing. But again, that's kind of where my head's at with the WoW Chronicles books is I consider them more something for research or learning more about topics that I want to learn more about. Not necessarily something that I would sit down and be like, yes, I want to sit through and read all of this. And I do have the first two Chronicles books, by the way. I didn't get Volume 3, but I did get, just as part of while I was working at Blizzard, I was able to get the first and second volumes. And I flipped through them and I enjoyed them. I was like, oh, this is cool. There's some interesting stuff in here. It's just not something that for me, I'm going to be like, no, I have to get the new one because I have to know absolutely everything as complete canon, no matter what, all of the time. Like, I'm fine with reading Wowpedia or whatever. Like I'm fine with learning that information through other means. I don't need to have the actual physical book myself personally. Again, subjective opinions. We're doing lots of those today. I will say I did hear a few things about Volume 4 that sounds like people are pretty disappointed by it. I'm not going to state an opinion one way or the other on that myself, just because I haven't read it. I am not in a position where I feel like I have enough of a perspective to give an opinion on Volume 4. Just that it's something that I was already like, maybe I'll get it, maybe I won't. And so then when I hear people saying like, oh, we're a little bit disappointed with it, I'm like, okay, then that pushes me over to the I'm not going to get it side of things. Besides, I've got too much WoW going on right now anyway, so I really don't even have, if I got it, it would go on my shelf and I wouldn't look at it because I have so much else going on in World of Warcraft right now that I don't have time for it. Yeah, so hopefully that answers that question. I'm going to move on to the next one. This one comes from Michael Williams on YouTube, who said, do you miss the way the game industry was compared to what it is now? I miss getting the complete game for X dollars. Now everything is expansion and patch after patch. Why can't most developers make a simple, complete game and then have a shop for cosmetics? So right away, I do think it's interesting that this is put as, why can't most developers make a simple, complete game with that caveat thrown in at the end of, and then make a shop for cosmetics? Because to me, that shop for cosmetics is kind of the core of a lot of what this question asker was talking against at the beginning. And maybe that's just because I see this from the perspective of someone who's also worked inside the gaming industry. This is, I see cosmetic shops as ongoing revenue to continue paying a development team to work on the game in the first place. And I see things like ongoing content patches, and I see things like expansions, especially like the sort of thing that's like there's the Diablo 4 expansion. But that is the sort of thing that if they weren't working on that Diablo 4 expansion, they would probably not have much of a team working on Diablo 4 at all. Because just the nature of how the gaming industry is these days, and to be clear, was back in the day as well, is that as soon as your development team is no longer working on something to produce that game, working on something for that game, what do you have them around for? Why are you still paying these people? That's just how the people in charge of this stuff think about these sort of things. Which is why I will ultimately say that no, I do not in any way miss the way that games were back in the day. A huge important thing to recognize here is that before the concept of games as a service really came around, before the concept of we're going to make this game and then we will continue to have post-launch support for this game and we will continue having developers working on this game after it launched. Before that came around, the standard in the gaming industry, this was like clockwork, and this was how your career in the gaming industry went prior to this being a thing, was you're going to work on a game, that game is going to release, and then you're going to look for a new job because they're not going to keep you around anymore after you've already produced the game. Like, why would they? There's no reason to continue paying you after you've already released the video game if you're not working on a video game. And there were some studios that did pretty well as being like, okay, we're going to release this game and then use the profits from that to make the next game, like the Fallout 1 and 2 sort of thing. That's where we got a lot of those sort of early sequels to video games, was game 1 would come out and then they would immediately start working on game 2 using the profits for game 1. And that was how they sort of kept alive. And there are aspects of that I certainly miss. I feel like there are a lot of games these days where the expansion should have just been a sequel, or the DLC. I would have liked that to have been something that was developed into a full-fledged sequel instead. But then again, you look back at some of the quote unquote sequels that were released for games back in the day, and a lot of those probably should have just been an expansion for the original game. Like, a lot of those are things that would have been just fine if it wasn't a completely separate video game, because it's just the same game again with a little bit more stuff to it. So there's kind of swings and roundabouts on that one. To me, I feel like the gaming industry is, I'm not going to say stable for obvious reasons, notably the large amount of layoffs that have occurred over the last couple of years, myself included, and they're still ongoing even after the industry is supposedly stabilizing. This is part of why, by the way, this is part of why I'm actually so happy to see that the WoW team at Blizzard has effectively unionized under the CWA. That's super cool and that's awesome. And I'm so happy for all of my friends and former colleagues and so on that are working on World of Warcraft that they were able to make that move. That's huge news. And I hope a lot more gaming companies and a lot more game developers follow suit. Because if Blizzard can do it, anyone can do it. Honestly, if under Activision Blizzard / Microsoft, you can form a union, then you can do that anywhere. So please, game developers, please continue to explore these things and actually look into what the benefits of collective bargaining are for development teams. It's a big deal, and I'm hoping is going to mean a bright future, not just for the developers of World of Warcraft, but also the game itself, because so many things, like, people always talk about, oh, Activision stepped in and made them do this. And while that tends to be overstated, there are still cases where it's like, okay, yeah, like, why does the brand new thing that just came out, the Reinhardt Axe bundle for Overwatch 2 that just came out, why does that cost $40? That feels crazy to me. This should be like $20, and that includes all the extra currency and stuff that it comes with. It just, things in Overwatch 2 feel overpriced to me. And that to me feels like the sort of decision that isn't made by the developers producing this stuff. This is the sort of decision that's made by people who are just trying to get as much money out of the game as possible. And to be clear, I also think it's an incorrect decision. I think they would get more money out of those if they were pricing them at a more reasonable, like, so many more people would buy this. And it's anyway, that's a complete other tangent. I'm not going to go down that road too much. But where was I at the start of all that? I was talking about unionizing and how all that's important. Basically, it all comes back to the fact that it used to be the case where you would release a video game, and like, as soon as that game was about to release, you were polishing up your resume and you were shopping. You were already looking for a new job before that video game released, because you knew as soon as it went out the door and as soon as you were no longer working on it, your job didn't exist anymore. That's how the video game industry used to work. The other thing that I will throw in here that I've mentioned a few times here on the show is a lot of what you're looking for is actually coming from indie development these days. A lot of the smaller projects where here's a game, we released this game, it's out now. There's not going to be any post-launch support for this game. We're just going to release this game. Like one that just came out recently that I really enjoyed is a game called Little Kitty Big City. I know, shocking that I like a game about a cat running around doing cat things in a city. But this game came out. There's not likely to be any DLC for it. There were like a couple of patches to fix some crashes, but that was it. They aren't going through and rebalancing things. They aren't going through and making different, like, they're not adding new cosmetics to it. They're not doing anything. It's a game that it's out. You can buy it, and they're hopefully enjoying the fruits of their labors at this point. And hopefully they use that to make another game in the future, because it was a really good game and I really enjoyed it. That's that case. That's a case of a game that you can just go and buy, and a lot of that is coming from indie developers these days. I really feel like the future of the gaming industry hinges a lot on what indie developers are doing right now, because so many of them are still sticking to those core concepts of, we're going to make a game and we're just going to make a game that's good, and we're going to put it out there, and hopefully people enjoy it. It should be noted that for every good indie game that is successful, there are a ton of good indie games that never go anywhere. And that's just unfortunate. And that's, I wish there was a way to make more of these games be more popular. That would have to be done on like the platform level through like Steam or something. I don't know. Maybe I've considered for a while about trying to do something like maybe here on the channel, or just spending more time on stream looking at indie games and showing them off and trying to get the word out about indie games that I like a little bit more. I'm not sure what exactly that will formulate into in my head, but it's something that I would like to do to just try to help, because there genuinely are a ton of really good indie video games out there that no one ever finds out about, because either no big streamers ever pick it up, or just the word never spreads. But that, again, is another reason to continue looking to indie games and look to a lot of these smaller developers to try to find that. Because it's also worth mentioning, like, most indie development teams in this day and age are the size of the teams that made like Ocarina of Time or Mario 64 or the Sonic the Hedgehog games and so on. Like, a lot of those original games back in the day were made by teams that are the size of most indie developers these days. So anyway, just some stuff to think about there. We're going to move on to the final question for today, which comes from Bree on YouTube, who said, "Why do you have a painting with smiling animals? I hate it." What's wrong with my painting? I like that painting. They just want to be your friends. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you all so much for watching and for hanging out. Again, if you have any questions that you would like to see answered here on the show, or topics in general that you'd like to see me cover, please do leave a comment. And again, if you disagree with any of my opinions, again, please do leave a comment. I love that discussion and I love that discourse. Just try and make it about what the difference of opinion is, and not trying to invalidate my own opinions, because that's just not how opinions work. I hate that. If you, I want to say a big shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so much for all the patrons who continue to support the channel. It really does mean a lot, and helps me keep this going. Helps it make sense for me to even continue working on this thing. All the support from Patreon really means a lot. Patrons do get first crack at having their questions answered here on the show. So if you are a patron, you go over to patreon.com. If you haven't checked it out yet, patreon.com/Devilor. Go over there and check that out. You can also, there will be a form that is linked inside the post for this episode that you can put your question in to make sure that it gets answered here on the show. And there's a few other fun little perks for patrons as well, including the ability to listen to an audio only version of the show. So if you don't want to watch this on YouTube, you'd rather listen along on Spotify or something, you can do that as a patron. You can also check out the Sounds Good merch store at devilore.com. That's where things like this hat come from. You can check that out over there. And like I said, I'll be streaming all week, so please come by the stream, check things out. We're going to be doing a bunch of RP this week. We're also going to be digging into the War Within pre-patch event when that comes out on, I believe it's on Thursday is when that hits. Maybe not. I'm going to have to double check that immediately after recording this video, because that's when I'm going to figure out what my streaming schedule for the week is. Anyway, thank you all so much once again for watching, and I'll see you later.